Tim, what's up, brother? How are you? So
Hey,
tomorrow we got one of the great
big day.
merchants of the United States reports after the bell. But before we go there, I want to
What's
ask
a
you a question.
merchant? What's a merchant?
Merchant. A merchant. You can look it up.
Okay.
It's an SAT word.
I
But
thought
I
you said
digress.
merkin. Sorry.
No, merchant. The
Right.
Merchant of Venice, if you recall your Shakespeare day. So what I learned this weekend, what I've been learning is what's old is new, man. I find myself engrossed in an hour and a half of All in the Family, MASH. I mean, it's tremendous old school television. What's your go-to show? I mean, I know what mine is. What's yours?
Well, first of all, I mean, MASH obviously set in the 50s, but I mean, when did that come out? I mean, that come out in the 70s. I mean, that is old school. So,
70s.
and
We had about 8 seasons, I believe.
yeah, I mean, everybody's got a favorite in there too. Were you a Hawkeye Pierce guy, or were you like?
I like Hawk. I like
Trapper John. I think
You
Trapper
know.
John was kind of a weird character, and I think it was weird that there was a TV show called Trapper John. That is weird. Okay, and it had nothing, not even the same guy.
But I was a big McLean Stevenson guy, and then one of the most visceral episodes of all time, and they didn't share this with the cast, so they wrote this in, but they didn't tell the cast this was happening. Radar walked into the operating room without a mask on. Hawkeye says, Radar put on a mask, and then he goes into his bit of not a soliloquy, but he announces that McLean Stevenson's helicopter was shot down over the Sea of Japan.
No.
And nobody knew about that. So they were trying to create and get the organic experience of the cast, and they did.
Yeah. Sherm Potter too, I mean, I feel like anyway, you asked me and it wasn't MASH for me. It was probably something like Vice. I mean, the charisma of Crockett and Tubbs. What's absurd about Vice is that it was actually really cool. And if you think about it in hindsight, like a turquoise sport coat with padded shoulders and espadrilles was cool, dude. And like the stubble now is obviously part of everybody's uniform other than mine. But back then, rocking some stubble was probably something. By the way, that's probably you 5 minutes after you wake up. But I could see you rocking like some Crockett.
I didn't. I will tell you, I wasn't a huge Miami Vice guy. However, and you might remember this because we're in college at the same time. This show was on a Friday night, and one episode that I remember like it was yesterday used the Brothers in Arms song off of Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms as
Great
sort
tune.
of the soundtrack for the show. And I remember that being a one. Anyway.
No, and just the soundtrack of that show was part of what made it, and at the time it was cutting edge. And that Dire Straits album, by the way, it's not for Dire Straits purists. It's not ever given much credit because of Money for Nothing kind of polluted it. But that was a great album. The last 5 tracks were great, but that was the peak of defensive Phil Collins listening. Like you could not get away from Phil Collins and that like dun 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 dun.
Awful.
That awful. And then Glenn Frey completely sold his soul. God rest his soul, because I love Glenn Frey and the Eagles, but that was tough. Smuggler's Blues, all of that stuff.
Awful.
Let's keep moving. So speaking
of the merchant. So the merchant I was talking about is Starbucks. They report after the bell tomorrow. This is a name that you've done extraordinarily well with. You've been steadfast, and the stock has had a tremendous bounce. So I'll say this. So December 24th, Christmas Eve 2018, the stock traded down to $60 and then had a huge bounce.
Yeah.
And then if you look what happened a month or so ago now, that's exactly where we traded down to, I think, on March 23rd.
Traded through it. Yeah.
So does the stock have leg into earnings tomorrow?
Look, I think you have to look at Starbucks very much like you have to question, challenge new normal. We do this too much, but new normal for a coffee shop in a world without commuters of the same concentration, in a world where people are, let's face it, one of the great things, I love the morning. I love getting up. My first cup of coffee is my favorite time of day, and it is walking to Starbucks. I'm a disciple, and I spread the gospel wherever I can. I love Starbucks. and I love the cup. And I even during the crisis tried to send away, see if I could get a sleeve of those venti cups, just so I felt like my coffee at home was like Starbucks. But the reality is, I'm making my coffee at home, and so when I'm able to get back into the groove, look, in New York City, there's a Starbucks in every corner. So I think when the world comes back to normal, I'll probably go back to that. But I do think that the multiple you're paying for Starbucks over the next 9 to 12 months will be in question. I had no problem paying at a 20% premium to the 5-year average historical PE around 28, 29 before all this started. And I wonder what we do going forward. But global company, 30,000 stores. I think Kevin Johnson, I think I've used this before, but I think he's the Tim Cook to Steve Jobs as Kevin Johnson is to not Charles, but Howard Schultz. And I think it's great operator, mid-sing same store sales growth. And I stay long, but I stay cautious.
Valuation, listen, in this environment, it was expensive in the best of times. Now it's probably maybe even more expensive, obviously, when we're dealing with what we're dealing with now. It's not to take away from anything they do, and you're right. I mean, Kevin Johnson was the absolute right person at the right time, and he took them to another level in terms of technology and everything that Starbucks has implemented. But it's very hard, given the run that it's had, given the valuation it's trading at, to think you have another 15 to 20%. So the way I would trade it tomorrow is you hope they beat or hope they come in line, hope the stock rallies and take profits post earnings.
On the way out here, this is a would you rather, and it's a tough one. Would you rather be forced to go into a store and order a Zima or a Bartles and James, or go into a Starbucks and ask for a triple soy latte decaf? You rather do, because it's a tough place to be.
So,
but I think
given those choices, it's clear to me that I would rather do the triple soy latte, because there seems to be no stigma attached to ordering just about anything in a Starbucks. Nobody even looks at you. You could order the most absurd things. Nobody bats an eye. So not that I ever really cared what people thought, because I don't. But given the choice, I'll take the Starbucks triple soy decaf latte.
Yeah, I think you have to. Amazingly, for all we know, we'll be drinking soy milk at some point. I came home from college my freshman year, and I have a younger brother, and I have 2 older brothers. And my younger brother was a junior in high school, so he'd kind of taken over the clubhouse. And we went up there. I was up there with my boys the first night back. Go up into, we called it the pad. And Andy had left, or one of his boys had left, a half-drunk Zima up there. Needless to say, he was never allowed back up there again, and we had some major questions. Guy, talk to you tomorrow.
Later, dude.